Good afternoon, everyone. Before we roll into our first quiz for this course, want to give you guys a sense for the types of questions that could be answered and the different style of what some of these multiple choice questions might look like. If you go to the WIO Courses webpage and click on the Files tab and look under Study Materials folder, you'll see that I've posted some example questions for this first quiz. What I want to do is give you an idea for how I construct these questions to give you a feel for the types of material that you might be looking at and how you might study things along those lines. Unfortunately, in the big intro psych sections, multiple choice exams, the Scantron stuff is kind of what we're left with, just given the size of the number of people in the class. However, multiple choice questions are notoriously bad at actually determining whether you know the material or not. If you think back to a lot of the multiple choice exams that you may have had in the past, a lot of it is just recognition questions, being able to say, oh, that looks familiar, so I'm just going to answer that. You're not going to get a lot of those types of questions in the multiple choice quizzes in this course. What I try and do is set these up so it requires you to demonstrate that you can apply some of the concepts that we've been looking at in a way to better evaluate whether or not you actually have a good understanding of some of the material that we've gone through. Again, posted some of those questions onto the WIO course website so you can go through and kind of get a feel for it. In this video, what I want to do is walk those of you who might be interested through how I might approach this if I were a student. When you sit down for a quiz or an exam, inevitably you're going to run into questions where you might not know the answer right away, but there's some things that you can do to try and start to rule out responses that you know aren't correct in order to maybe increase your likelihood of selecting a correct answer for any given question. So just want to go in this video, walk through some of these, and give you an idea for how you might approach questions that come up in this course. So the first question we give you is taken from the historical figures lecture, our very first lecture. Question is, Sally is presented with a number of colored objects during a research study. She's asked to look at each object closely and describe her visual experience in extensive detail. This research involves a technique known as blank. Okay. So in this question, what I'm asking you to do is I'm giving you a scenario and asking you to apply some of those concepts that we covered in lecture. So if we're going down through and reading each one of these, first option is mass practice. Doesn't sound familiar to me, but it's a possibility. I don't know off the top of my head what that is, so I'm going to leave A as an option. Option 2 is behavioral genetics. Behavioral genetics doesn't seem like it has anything to do with learning and looking at objects and describing your visual experience, so we're going to cross that one out. Option C, psychoanalysis. That was Freudian stuff, had to deal with unconscious drives, life instinct, death instinct. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with this question, so we're going to cross that one off. And the last one is introspection. Remember that introspection was a technique used by the structuralists, involved being presented with some stimuli over and over again and having to describe it. This sounds like exactly what we're talking about here, and so I would select D as my answer here. Now, even if you didn't know and couldn't choose between mass practice or introspection, if we've gotten the other two answers off the table, even if you have to guess, even if it comes to worst case scenario where you're guessing between A and D, you've got a 1 in 2 chance as opposed to 1 in 4 chance. So you've increased the likelihood that you're going to get this question right. Okay. Second question, again, a historical figures question. Question is, Garrett is a humanistic psychologist and is interested in individual well-being. Okay? He conducts a series of interviews with college students with GPAs of 3.7 or better in order to identify factors that contribute to high achievement. Which of the following is a general limitation of Garrett's approach? Okay, so we're looking for, and what we want to do is think back to the lecture, and we're talking about humanistic psychology, some of the strengths and weaknesses of that movement, okay? And then take those and apply to this scenario here. So our first option is qualitative interviews used in the study should be limited to 5 or fewer people. Well, if we think about qualitative interviews, don't remember anything about those being limited. That's just asking people about their experiences, things along those lines. But I don't know that limited to 5 or fewer people would be a limitation necessarily. So we're going to cross that one off. Option B, factors influencing achievement in this college sample may not generalize to all members of society. That should be ringing some bells, right? We talked about one of the limitations of humanistic psychology was this idea of studying a very select group of individuals who were very high achieving and questions about whether or not that would generalize. So we're going to leave B open for a moment. Oops. C, Garrett's research does not take into account the impact of internal mental processes. Well, I don't see anything in there that has anything to do with internal mental processes or and not including those, so we'll cross that one out. And then option D is both B and C as limitations, but since we've crossed out C and ruled that as not a reasonable response, we can cross out D, and that leaves us B as the only answer left, and it is the correct answer. Okay. Question 3. The correlation between height in inches and weight in pounds in a sample of 100 adult men is R equal 0.68. The direction of this relationship is indicated by blank and the magnitude by blank. Okay, so this is a question from our research methods lectures and wanting to think about what that correlation coefficient, that R value, means and how we interpret it. Okay, so this one is tricky, and you're going to get a lot of questions like this where there's two different options, and you have to make sure the right option goes in the right spot. Okay. So option A, the absolute value of the, so the direction of this relationship is indicated by the absolute value of the correlation and the magnitude by the presence or absence of a negative sign. Well, we remembered that correlation is, we were looking at the strength and magnitude. It has to do with the value and whether or not we have a positive or negative correlation. So we'll leave A for right now. B, the direction of this relationship is indicated by the dependent variable and the magnitude by the independent variable. IVs, DVs don't have anything to do with the strength here, so we can rule that out. Option C, it looks like we still have IV, DV. We've just flip-flopped that around. We can rule that out. And so now we get down to the direction of this relationship is indicated by the presence or absence of a negative sign, and the absolute and the magnitude is determined by the absolute value of the correlation. So we've got two items that has the same information, they're just flip-flopped around. So if we think about the direction of the relationship, right, is this a positive or a negative relation? Remember that we determine that by the presence or absence of a negative sign. Our correlation here is 0.68, and so it suggests a positive correlation between height and weight. And so our answer here is going to be D, right? Absolute value of the correlation, or remember, as correlation gets closer to 1 or -1, it indicates a stronger relationship, but that doesn't indicate the direction of the relationship. So for this one, D would be our correct answer. Question 4, not 14. Investigators are interested in the prevalence of serious trauma among our Wyoming citizens. Based on census data, cellular records, landline numbers, payroll information, and family records, researchers compile a list of documented residents age 18 or older. A subset of those individuals are contacted and asked to participate in a brief survey, with all residents having an equal chance of selection. The approach used in this study is most consistent with which of the following? Okay, this is one of these questions that'll come up that you get a pretty large scenario. What your job is go through, take a look at this stuff, at the information in the question, and decide what is relevant and what's not. So in this one, we have things like Wyoming citizens, different types of data, for collecting a list of documented residents, And then what we're doing is we're going through and we want to contact a subset of these individuals where anybody who's selected has an equal chance of, or everybody in our population has an equal chance of selection. So going down and taking a look at our choices, naturalistic observation. Well, I know that naturalistic observation is just kind of like people watching, right? If we're going to go through and systematically collect a population of all the individuals in the state, and then go through and select a subset of those to send a questionnaire to, doesn't seem like we're just people watching, so we're going to rule out naturalistic observation. A case study, remember, a case study is just a single intensive study of one individual. Looks like we're going to be looking at multiple individuals, can rule out case study. Double-blind procedure, that doesn't ring any bells. We didn't cover double-blind procedure in lecture, so we can go ahead, cross that off. And our final option here is random sampling. Remember, random sampling is collecting a group of individuals from the larger population where everybody who's selected or everybody in the population has an equal chance of selection. So we've randomly selected of all Wyoming citizens who have been involved in serious trauma. We're going through and sending out surveys to a subset of those individuals where everybody has an equal chance of selection. This is our random sample, and so this would be the answer for this one. Next question, historical figures question. Anne and Andy are interested in gustation, right? The taste of the sense of taste. Andy identifies with blank and is most interested in blank. Andy identifies with blank and is most concerned with blank. Okay, so what we have to do is we're going down through and looking at our options, is pairing the movement with what that movement was most interested in doing. Okay, it ends up being kind of a complicated question, but if we go through and we start to find things that don't match with the things they should, we can start ruling things out. So if we go through and take a look at the first option, Anne identifies with structuralism and is most concerned with the basic components of sensation. Andy identifies with functionalism and is most concerned with the ways in which taste may perpetuate survival. This sounds like a good option to me. We know that structuralism was interested in identifying the basic components of mental processes, functionalism with how psychological processes perpetuate survival. So A is sounding pretty good, but I'm going to go through and read the rest of these. Okay. Option B, Anne identifies with humanism and is most interested in the influence of learning behavior on taste. Okay. This should set up red flags because humanists weren't really interested in learning behavior. If we read the second piece, Andy identifies with psychoanalysis and is most concerned with the role of unconscious drives and taste preference. We know psychoanalysis was associated with unconscious drives, but humanists weren't really worried about learning. So it looks like we have a mismatch there, so we can cross that off. Okay, going to option C, Anne identifies with behaviorism and is most interested in the ways in which taste may perpetuate survival. Again, that doesn't match up. That's not what behaviorists were interested in, rules of observable behavior, not perpetuating survival. The second option, Andy identifies with functionalism, and is most concerned with the basic components of sensation. Recall that functionalism was interested in the function of processes. We've got a couple of mismatches here. We can cross that one off. Our last option, Anne identifies with psychoanalyses and is most interested in the role of unconscious drives on taste preference. Okay, psychoanalysis matches up with unconscious, so that seems like it could be reasonable. Andy identifies with structuralism and is most concerned with the influence of learning behavior on taste. Remember that behaviorists were interested in learning behavior, not structuralists. That one's not good, and so we're back with our final answer, A, that sounded good in the first place, but important to go through and look at all of these items. Okay. And our last question, okay, Dr. X is conducting research on a new form of electroconvulsive therapy for depression. Although the treatment appears to be effective, preliminary research indicates the potential for permanent brain damage in 2 to 3% of those individuals receiving the intervention. Dr. X fails to inform potential volunteers of this risk as they enroll for the current study. Dr. X is in violation of which of the following ethical principles? Okay. So basically, we have a treatment that is associated with not a trivial amount of risk, and we've got an investigator who's not telling people who may participate in the study that this risk exists. This is clearly problematic. Which one of those ethical principles did we talk about that gets most closely at the problem here? A, generosity. I don't remember generosity as one of the things that we had talked about, but we'll leave it for now. B, justice. Remember that justice was this idea of fair and equitable treatment across all individuals in the population. So we're not just conducting the research on this one group of people to then force another group of people to get the benefit. We're not really getting at anything here. Basically, we're keeping secrets from participants. So justice doesn't seem to be probably one of our best options. Option C, respect for persons. Remember that respect for persons has to do with assuming that people have the autonomy to make their own reasonable, rational decisions. And because of that, we have informed consent procedures. So before you participate in a study, you get to know all the risks, all the possible benefits, all the things that will be required to do for the study. And so if we're not telling people about the risks, then this could be a violation of respect for persons. So we're going to leave that one up for right now. Last option is beneficence. This is do no harm. It sounds like even though there is a potential drawback, there's always the potential for drawback, side effects, and things along those lines. So even though it's a small risk, it doesn't look like we're actively taking steps to hurt people or not trying to prevent them from being hurt. Beneficence doesn't seem like that great of a fit. Here, it's really that respect for persons. Providing people with enough information so that they can make the determination whether or not they do or don't want to participate in the study. So this should give you an example of some of the types of questions that will likely come up in this first quiz and then some of the subsequent quizzes. You can see some of these items are going to require you to demonstrate that you understand what's going on with these processes and to be able to apply them when you're moving forward and selecting answers. Some general suggestions as you're going through for this next quiz and all the quizzes moving forward. These are some big issues. Number one, provide an answer for all questions. The only way you can assure that you're not going to get a question right is if you leave it blank. Never, 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 even if it's a complete guess, A, B, C, or D, write something down for all questions. Okay. Another thing, read all items carefully and identify what's important. On all of these items, particularly some of these vignettes and examples, there'll be stuff that's important and stuff that's just kind of context stuff. Try and go through and say, all right, what about this question is important? What are the important parts that I need to focus on? Next suggestion, make sure that you read through all the responses. People commonly will identify one option and circle it back, oh yeah, that's the right option, and not read through all your responses. Always read through your responses and start marking off the ones that you know can't be correct because there's some sort of discrepancy going on. Skip items that you don't know and come back to them. This is what happens on multiple choice exams. You might hit an item and have no idea what the question is trying to get at, but as you go through, you may read other questions that start to jog your memory, and you may be 3/4 of the way through the exam and you're like, oh, I remember now what was going on. You can go back and answer those questions that maybe you had skipped previously once you've got clues later on. Now, this is also a time-saving mechanism. You don't want to sit for 15 minutes on one item and then be pressed at the end of the exam for time because you spent all your time doing over one item. Skip the ones that you don't know and make sure that you come back to them, although make sure that you provide an answer for all of the items on the exam. And then finally, mark up your exam with notes, cross off answers, scribble things down, draw diagrams. I don't care. You're going to have the exam form and you're going to have your bubble sheet. All your answers will go on the bubble sheet. Your exam form is yours, at least for within the time frame that we're taking the exam, to write on, draw notes, pictures, anything that helps you answer these questions correctly. We'll collect those exam forms at the end of the lecture, okay? But while you're taking it, make use of that as scratch paper. Make notes to yourself in an effort to try and winnow things down to the best possible response if you're struggling with any of these items. So hope this is helpful. These are just general recommendations as you're moving through to try and take these quizzes skillfully. As always, if you have any questions about anything we've gone through in this video, make sure to get in contact with me. Come see me during lecture, or shoot me an email or something like that. Happy to clarify or help guide your preparation in any way that I can. So thanks a lot, and good luck with this first quiz.